All right, so our next talk is going to be focused on a theme that really all engineering leaders at all stages of companies have to grapple with and constantly navigate, and that is the balance between shifting your focus to matters of organizational leadership, team building, strategic decision-making on the one hand, and really staying on top of technical trends and your actual deep technical domain expertise on the other. It's a pretty common balance for a lot of engineering leaders to have to navigate. And so we're excited to have with us today Tramale Turner, who is CTO of Taxbit, which is a digital asset and accounting platform, also a Sapphire portfolio company. And prior to his CTO role at Taxbit, Tramale was in engineering leadership roles at companies like Nintendo, Stripe, and F5. And in a talk titled Hardcore Engineering, which may be my favorite session title from the day to day, he will be talking about really his perspectives on the pros and cons of keeping up your technical chops. With that, Tramale, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. How's everyone doing? Let's start with a check-in. I heard a couple of goods. Anybody not feeling so great? If you're not feeling so great, raise your hand. Go ahead. Don't be shy. It's OK. We don't all feel great all the time. It's all right to not feel so great. I was just at a conference where I was giving a talk about networking for engineers. And I tied a bunch of geeky abstractions about layer 2, layer 3, layer 4, layer 7 networking to how to behave as a human. And one of the things I ended with was this quote from a DJ who was a pretty popular DJ back when I was younger, living in Detroit. And one of the things he said was, if you can't change the people around you, then you should change the people around you, which that's inculcated in my brain, and I love it. But the other thing was, when you're at the end of your rope, tie a knot. Don't slide off. Hang on, and just remember, there ain't nobody bad like you. I want you all to remember that. And we're going to start trying to figure out this whole notion of how do we retain our technical chops? How do we remain technically relevant? How do we remain credible and keep our people motivated to want to talk to us as we climb the so-called corporate ladder? You can't really have a talk these days without dunking on Elon. And Elon was perhaps the most recent genesis of this statement, but probably not where it originated. Still, when Elon says something, it becomes a meme, all right? And so, anybody here work for Twitter, by the way? I'm sorry. We all know that Twitter's been in the news recently, and this is the genesis of that comment. And that was in May. As the months and the weeks started to move forward, you started to see more folks talking about things about this notion of hardcore engineering. I don't necessarily agree with what's said on the screen here, but I do appreciate that the meme was proliferating. And proliferate it did. And it's not to say that it was necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. It was just a thing that was out there, that people are starting to have a conversation, as we want to do within our industry, about whether or not it's important to be technically relevant. Does anybody have a canonical definition of what hardcore engineering means, by the way? Anybody want to proffer a definition super quick? I'll repeat it if you say it. Anybody? Anybody? Quite interesting, yeah? I think we all, in the dark recesses of our mind, know what he's talking about and what others mean, right? You're coding, you're landing PRs, you have extremely deep technical chops. You can get there on a keyboard. You can release in great effect, with great impact, anything within your product suite, within infrastructure, security, what have you, because you know all the things, because clearly, as CTO, you know everything, right? Again, Elon coming back and letting us know that it's super important for leaders who are leading technical people to have technical chops. And I don't disagree. I don't think any of us would disagree. I don't think that that's a controversial statement whatsoever. But I do think that there can and should be nuance. So we're going to talk a little bit about the nuance. And the way I want to do that is talk about some of the people in this room. And I just teased Joe. I know Joe. I love Joe. You should all buy Pulumi stuff. It's amazing. But I had Joe up here originally, and I was like, I can't put Charity and Joe since they're both going to be in the room. But a lot of you may know Charity. You will see her later today if you don't know her. She's amazing. David Singleton from Stripe, CTO of Stripe. Will Larson, CTO of Calm. And I think each of them have really interesting ways of remaining technically relevant. And I would love to introduce those to you today. Charity talks a lot about this notion of the pendulum which swings between leadership and engineering. And if you haven't heard about what she means by that, or if you haven't heard the general thesis, it's that every engineer in their career should try leadership at least once. It doesn't mean that it has to be a durable career move, to borrow from Dave's talk earlier today, that notion of durability. But that by giving yourself the opportunity to see how difficult of a role, how difficult of a career that leadership in the form of management is, you can make more informed and or better decisions as an individual contributor. I think that's a really interesting perspective. Charity says here that your engineering skills do wither and erode, that is, they atrophy as times go on. It will take longer and longer to refresh your skills the longer you go without using them. Management skills, on the other hand, don't decay as quickly. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but this is her perspective. They don't go out of date every few years like languages, frameworks, and technologies tend to do. Famously, someone in our industry who was a founder, a CEO, a fairly well-known engineer, and still a fairly well-known engineer, decided to completely leave the executive tier and become an individual contributor. And I thought that was really interesting and bold, and quite frankly, the right thing to do for Mitchell. HashiCorp is a durable company. People are still going to use Terraform. They're still going to use Vault. They're still going to use all of their many products existing and under development. Mitchell chose for himself the opportunity to do what he loves and to dive deeply into being a software engineer. He still, I'm pretty sure, retains all of his stock and is still probably pretty well regarded around his organization. But he made a choice, and he made a choice that's right for him. So one option that you have, if you want to remain technically relevant in your careers, is to take on a new role. No one says that you have to remain VP of whatever, or CTO, or whatever tier you're at, because it is a career shift. And if you choose to be a person who's contributing every day and who is providing impact through the code that you write, that's 100% okay. David Singleton takes a different route. And I really admire David, not just because he was formerly my CTO, but because he was visible as an engineer, but still quite visible as an executive centered on the business and the user, this really stringent notion of users first and laser focus on the user experience. And if you go to David's GitHub, you'll see a lot of toy projects. You'll see the aforementioned ray tracer. You'll see a spreadsheet that he wrote that does statistical analysis. And you'll see a bunch of other things, none of which have anything to do with Stripe. They're all just things that he plays with and things that he uses in order to, I think, partially extend and amplify his personal brand, but also gives him an opportunity to remain technically curious and to have an opportunity to stretch and flex that muscle that he doesn't want to atrophy. The other thing that he does that's really interesting that I really love, and something that I think some of you might want to take away today, is that he takes an engineeringcation within the organization. What does that mean? Once a quarter, if he has the time to do so, he'll go into a team at Stripe, and he will pair with the developer on that team, and he will land a PR, a production PR. Now, it won't be a big thing. It won't be something that, years from now someone will look at and go, who the hell wrote this and why? He pairs with that engineer because he wants to get an experience of what the developer is going through day to day. because one of the things that he's critically passionate about is developer productivity and developer experience, as I think we all should be. If you have a startup today, and that startup is more than 10 people, and you're not already thinking about developer experience, and you're not already thinking about when teams start to split, how easy is it going to be for those teams to interop and to work with each other within either a mono code base or within a fragmented code base? Whatever you've developed is probably the right thing for your situation. Having that opportunity to sit with those teams and just feel the pain, as it were, I think it's a great thing. And so take an engineering occasion. Like, have the opportunity to flex with a team and understand their context, understand their perspective, understand what they're going through, and maybe also give yourself a chance to stretch and exercise and flex that muscle. Will Larson takes yet a different route. Will writes prolifically. I would guess that there's probably not a person in this room that hasn't read something that he's written, or has been exposed to one of these two books, or has been exposed to his Twitter feed. I find Will's writing extremely dense and tedious, but I love him. He's a great guy. And I kid on the dense and tediousness, kind of, not really. I think that one of the things that you can do as an engineering leader, as an engineer, is write. And this is something that I encourage the folks that I work with to do without fail, because I think, as we all know, that when you write, it requires you to be rigorous. It exercises muscles that, again, borrowing from the keynote presentation from this morning, that are in our neocortex, but also some of the things in our amygdala. So when you start to fear what people will think about what you're writing, it also encourages you to be more durably rigorous and to think deeply about the things that you're putting out there, that you're proffering out to the environment. Writing and educating, clearly a way to stretch those muscles and to make sure that you're remaining relevant and that you're giving yourself the space to do that thing that got you introduced and hopefully loving this industry in the first place. So we talked about 3 of the 4 pillars. And I didn't tell you that there were 4. I only put 3 people on the screen. We talked about taking on a new role. We talked about perhaps taking an engineering education. We talked about writing and educating. And now we're going to talk about the most important thing if you choose to exercise that muscle, if you choose to remain technically relevant, if you choose to land PRs and to show up as a technical leader that everyone wants you to be. You need to stop caring what other people think. Because there are a bunch of you in this room right now who are sitting and thinking through this and going, yeah, I should write more code because other people expect you to do so. Don't do it for those reasons. Certainly don't do it because you're trying to please someone else. Again, think back to that first conversation of the day. Think about your own agency and think about what's important to you. And think about what you're there to do as a VP of whatever or a CT of whatever. You're there to run the business. You're there to enable those engineers that work with you to do the best work of their careers. If you want to write code, do so. But do so in a controlled environment. Do so in a manner that doesn't interrupt their agency and their opportunities to grow and to develop and to help deliver on the promise of the business. You need to be out there worrying about making sure that the business itself is durable. That's all I really wanted to talk to you about today. My name is Tramale. I didn't introduce myself at the beginning. Shruti did a great job. But I think it was really more important to talk about the message and not about who I am. But I am a father. I'm a Seattleite. I'm the CTO of Taxbit. I really am appreciative for the very valuable time that you've invested to listen to my words. And I think we're going to have a little time for Q&A. So thank you so very much. I believe there are going to be mics passed around. If anyone wants to be brave enough to break the ice and ask me a really hard question, I love hard questions. Easy questions are OK, too. But oh, there's a mic coming to you in a moment.
Hello? Yeah. My name is Peter Ehlert. I'm also a Seattleite. I work for HighSpot. I'm curious, right, you say that it's not necessary to stay technical. How do you address being relevant to your engineering organization and making sure that you have credibility, right, to the extent that you're not engaging for yourself to go be a better engineer?
Yeah, I think you might index on the wrong problem, because the problem is really, how do you get users interested in the thing that you're building, and to make sure that you have enough runway if you're still not reaching some level of profitability, or if you are, how do you maintain those users and make sure that they don't churn? If your company is, and I love and appreciate HighSpot, not only do I love and appreciate HighSpot, I'm literally moving into your building in a few days. So looking forward to that. We just signed the lease. I am, but in all seriousness, I think it's important to remember, as executives, we give amplification to the technical voice within the organization, but we're there to run the business, yeah? And I understand many of us have that question of, well, if I'm not showing up technically, then people are going to lose confidence in me, and they're not going to want to follow me or listen to the things that I say. And again, I think that's the wrong problem. I think the problem is, how do you make sure that those individuals feel like they have agency, and that they feel as though they have ownership, and that they are enabled to do the work that you know that they can do, because that's why you hired them in the first place. You didn't hire them to follow you. You hired them to really build and to execute, and for you to be able to entrust them with the notion that you believe autonomously that they can go out there and master their craft so that they can deliver impact on your behalf, on all of the collective of the organization's behalf, that they will act as owners. So that's my thought.
Hi, I'm Jennifer. I work with Dave at Pendo. So outside of work, I'm a mother and a wife and a person who likes to enjoy time in the mountains and do those sorts of things. So when I think about staying technically relevant, the hardest part for me is figuring out when. So if I decide I want to have an engineering-cation, is that something I go to Dave and say, this is something I want to do during my work hours? Or is that something that needs to happen during my off time?
Yeah, I don't think it should be something that happens during your off time if it's something that's going to be intrinsically impactful and valuable for the organization. You taking that engineering-cation is like really an investment in understanding the context that your engineers are operating in. But remember, I gave 2 other examples of things that you could do. And a great thing that all of you should take away is read incessantly. I know you all already do that, but just if it's Notion or Feedroll or whatever the thing is that you use that thing religiously. You probably won't read everything that you tag and every article that you say, yeah, I definitely want to go gRPC for blah, blah, blah. I want to read that thing later. You may not read it, but there will be things that you do get an opportunity in your downtime, in your copious amounts of free time. I know as a girl dad of a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, I have so much free time to read. But it's I think a constant opportunity to just give yourself the space to find the thing that works for you and invest the time to really lean into that opportunity to grow yourself and expose yourself to new thoughts and things that may or may not even be relevant to the core thing that you do within the business. But strong proponent of engineering-cations, even stronger proponent of just reading incessantly. Time for maybe one more question, I think.
Hey, thanks for the presentation. It's awesome. My name is Scott. I'm the co-founder and CTO of the Zeta Block. So our company actually just founded this year, and we grew the company to 15 engineers. I still write code every day. I think my question is that as I more and more team grow and bigger, I'm thinking, why do I need to stay technical relevant? I think this is my personal opinion, but I definitely want to hear your opinion, is that I want to stay technical relevant because I want to make the right choice when I do the buy or build decision. And that's probably one of the most important reasons for the to stay technical relevant. But I just want to hear your experience and your past experience about this, and why do you think it's important? Second is when you do this buy or build decision, what's actually what's your trade-off analysis for that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I got exactly 25 or less than 25 seconds. I'm over 20 seconds. We could have an entire chat about this, but I'll try and be super quick. What I would say is two things. One, make sure that your people have the data that they're bringing to you, the rigor behind that data, that they've thought deeply about the decision that they ultimately, for some reason, need to escalate to you to make. And if they've done all of the things that you would expect them to do, great. Probably makes it a really easy tiebreaker decision between maybe that binary option or multiple options of if I'm going to buy, build, hybrid, whatever. So what that means in essence is try to trust your people or imbue them with trust in some manner, and if not, try to figure out why you can't. Like, what are the things, what is it about the environment that's making it an escalation all the way up to the CTO to make that decision? The other thing is, yes, there are going to be times, because there is nuance, where you have to be the person to make the decision, right? Ultimately, there may not be enough capacity, there may not be enough competency, and you may be the person that has the most resident expert in the decision point that needs to be made in that moment. And in those cases, which are hopefully minimal, I think it's okay to lean in, again, to the decision. And it's not really about technical relevance at that point. It's about you exercising again, I'm going to borrow heavily from Dave here, the models that you're familiar with to help you make that decision. Because odds are you probably don't have a lot of technical depth in a commercial solution. You didn't build it. You just know what you need it to do, and you know how to evaluate and how to make sort of a decisioning criteria framework for an effective decision at the end of the day. But the real thing in your question is, how do I sort of maintain that credibility? And again, don't care about credibility, care about the business, care about what your objective is. If you make the right decisions for the business, people are going to be super happy with you. If you're writing code all day and you're landing PRs and the business is going to insert expletive here, not going to be very happy with you, right? And so care about the business first. Care about your talent as an engineer, because that's something that gives you that individual sort of perspective and agency. For sure, don't lose that, but remember what you're there to do. You're there to run a successful business. Thank you all for the time.